I want to go into the substance of the deal, but before that, take me to the process, because I've been around some trade deals. They tend to take a long time, and this is really pretty fast. At the same time, you didn't have a special trade representative. Who did this deal? Did you do it personally?
Well, I did, and Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, we're the co-heads of the economic dialogue. But really, a lot of the work was done by Wendy Teramoto, my chief of staff.
So into the substance of the deal, we know that it covers a wide range of topics, as I say, from liquid natural gas to beef to financial services. At the same time, if you take these all together, how material are they in terms of the trade deficit with China right now?
Well, I think they're material in three regards. The first regard is, as you pointed out in your introduction, trade arrangements are normally denominated in multiple years. This first set, has been denominated in tens of days. So there's a huge difference in how rapidly we got something done. Second, these are quite specific transactions with quite specific dates. Essentially, all of these things are scheduled to start on July 16th. In the world of trade, July 16th is a wink and a blink. And I think that's important for the third reason. We have a lot more issues to deal with the People's Republic of China. And I believe that the fact that we got these long-standing aggravations out of the way so quickly augurs well for the relationship pattern going forward. But we have many, many more issues, and so the next task will be figuring out a one-year plan, and then with some data points in between, some deliverables in between, and then once we get through the one-year plan with success, then let's work into a longer-term plan.
So give us a peek into that one-year plan. Should we expect a series of these sorts of deals coming out over the next year, or is it a different approach?
Well, we hope to have deliverables. I think one of the historic problems with trade is that it's become a kind of long-term debating society rather than something that was results-oriented. Both the Chinese government and we have become very results-oriented. And if we can keep that going, we'll get a lot done.
Well, as you suggest, sir, the things you addressed in this one are things that have been simmering for some time, and now you've resolved them, it appears. What's next on your list?
Well, as you know, even when I was in the private sector, it wasn't my habit to speculate on what comes next. I'm much more comfortable announcing things as we actually accomplish them. And I think between now and the end of the year, we will hopefully have more announcements about actual accomplishments.
So to give you a sense, and I know you don't like to say what's going to come next, I have to ask you what comes next nonetheless. Sure. But give us some sense of the scope and the magnitude of what you hope to accomplish over that one-year period of time that you just said is your plan.
Well, there are all kinds of sectors that have not yet been addressed. So the methodology that we'll use is the same one we did here. The Chinese submitted their wish list. We submitted our wish list. We decided which of those items from the two lists were achievable within a very finite period of time. That's what we focused on. So now the question is, what time frame do we put on the issues that we didn't yet address? And so those talks will begin probably over the weekend.
So the skeptics, Secretary, are going to say, look, you got a $347 billion trade deficit with China. Exporting more beef and LNG isn't going to close the gap. So what's going to be on the agenda that will?
Well, it's a whole variety of things, but the gap is not just a gap. The gap is made up of hundreds and hundreds of different little items, and therefore there's not going to be one silver bullet that suddenly takes our trade deficit from the 300-odd billion to zero. That's not the way it's going to work.
Are you trying to get it to zero, Secretary?
No, we'll get it as far as we can. But the important thing is, as we accomplished here, we want to do it by increasing total trade and by increasing the ability of our companies to export. That's the #1 objective, because that's what will create more jobs here. Number 2 is the trade deficit itself.
Yeah.
And that's the way we want to help solve that is with the beef. Beef, as you know, is a $2.5 billion market that we've been effectively precluded from. Your guess is as good as mine as to what market share we'll get, but symbolically, beef has been a big, big irritant for the agriculture community here, because that fussing around has been going on for way more than a decade.
Secretary Ross, the objective of your administration has been stated as quite clear. It's to make trade fairer. The agreements with China, though, are meant to be win-win agreements. And I pick out a sector like the autos, and I wonder how you guys can come to a win-win arrangement when at the moment it's win-win for China and lose-lose for the United States. Give me an idea of how you can approach that situation that is a win-win for both countries.
Well, you can't take things in isolation, but the fact is that none of our trade deficit comes from China exporting automobiles to the U.S. There's an issue about the parts coming in and parts coming in from elsewhere through NAFTA and through other loopholes, but the Chinese do not actually sell cars here, so that's not the problem. Where our car deficit comes is much more with Europe, with Japan, and with South Korea.
We want to welcome once again our Bloomberg TV and radio audience. We are speaking with Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross. Now, Mr. Secretary, with respect to China specifically, does this indicate a different approach which essentially takes off the table the currency manipulation question?
Well, the currency manipulation question, for the moment at least, has been resolved. Currency manipulation is the function of the Treasury Department, not Commerce, and Congress has laid out very specific criteria as to what constitutes currency manipulation and what does not. The Chinese, by that definition, are not currency manipulators at this point in time, and that's why Secretary Mnuchin issued the order that he did. Now, that can change over time, but the more important thing is how do we bring jobs back? How do we make the gross domestic product grow faster? And how do we reduce the trade deficit? So there are myriad ways of trying to do that. A lot will be in goods, some will be in services. And we started on that here with the credit cards. The U.S. credit card companies had effectively been boxed out of China. All the electronic payment systems people had been. Now we've gotten that pretty well fixed. U.S. financial service firms had not been licensed to underwrite bonds or to clear bonds. Now that's getting fixed. So in addition to agriculture, in addition to natural gas, we also began in the services sector, but there's a lot more to do there, particularly the digital economy and a lot of other both financial and non-financial services. Services, as you know, have become a huge part of our economy and a huge part of our international commerce.
Mr. Secretary, you've now made a specific step forward with China. Does that free you up a bit to move on NAFTA, and particularly with respect to Mexico? Last time you and I spoke, we talked about when you would get moving with NAFTA. What does that timetable look like?
Well, I'm hoping it'll be quite imminent. As you might have noticed, the Senate yesterday finally confirmed my friend Bob Lighthizer as the United States Trade Representative. Some people in the Congress had been very reluctant to grant us the provisions of the 90-day letter until we had a Senate-confirmed U.S. trade rep. Well, he was confirmed last night. I believe he'll be sworn in on Monday, and I expect he and I will be making the rounds of Capitol Hill the early part of next week.
I did notice that confirmation. I was going to ask you about that because I know that you've worked with him before. I know that you're close. Is that going to pick up the pace as a practical matter? Because as we know, Mr. Lighthizer has a bit of experience in negotiating trade deals.
Well, Lighthizer is a wonderful addition to the U.S. trade rep position and to the overall effort to adhere to the president's agenda and fix our trade problems.
So finally, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to ask you something that may be a bit outside your jurisdiction, but you know about it and you care about it. And that is a report now that that your colleague, Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, is urging regulators to take a look at the Volcker rule and how they might amend that way that's being enforced. Is that essential to the deregulatory effort with respect to financial services?
Well, I think you ought to address Secretary Mnuchin on that topic. I think that there are some things about the Volcker rule that probably should be changed, but I'm very busy with what is within my jurisdiction. I'm not going to go poaching on other people's.